Motion tracking is a fun little feature and in fact quite useful at certain times depending on the type of animation you're doing. It's a nice way to actually engage animation into real world type of video footage if you want. And you can get some really cool artistic effects if you want to do that and tell some stories that way instead of your typical cartoon type of metaphor. If you have access to the working files, go ahead and come down to the Layers palette here, click on New Layer, and select Image. Now this is the same thing you do when you import a JPEG file or anything like that, but instead we're going to import a movie. And I've got two kinds here. They're both the same. It depends on which one works best on your system. The MP4 will play on just about anything, but it's got a little more compression and that shows up. I'm going to select the MOV file and double click on that. This is a video file from NASA. There's lots of public domain videos there if you'd like to use those, kind of fun stuff. Now you'll notice I've completed the movie import and nothing's showing up. In fact, if I use my mouse wheel and scroll a little bit, we can see that there seems to be a placeholder, but I'm not seeing anything. This is a little bug inside of Anime Studio Pro. If you come down to the timeline and scrub, all of a sudden, there's our video. And we can see that we've got a little aerial footage going over a glacier here and some very cold water. What I'd like to do is get an object in the background over here, maybe a spaceship or something, that we can track and make it look like it's part of the scene. So there's a couple things I want to do as I start. First is to bring the timeline marker all the way back to 0. And you'll notice that the movie is larger than the actual render area. You don't always want to shrink this down. How come? Well, if you had a, say, camera phone shot or movie, and you were panning a room really slowly and you wanted an animated character to appear like it was sitting on the couch in the room or something, you would actually need to track points outside of this render frame so you could connect the character to it, and those move with the scene. So as you pan the room, you would see then the couch move into view. You would also see your character move into view. We're taking a little more basic approach right here just to go ahead and make it really, really obvious. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this up a little bit, and we'll zoom in again with the mouse wheel just a little. Now, first things first. When we double click on the layer settings for the movie, there is no movie tab. We'll need to come over to the image button here, and you can see there's some other options that we didn't have available when we were working with imported stationary images like Photoshop files. We can go ahead and loop the movie indefinitely, and everything else is pretty self-explanatory right here, so know that you can go ahead and hold last frames of the movie if you want to have something stable, like you pan a room where somebody's sitting and then you hold that last frame while they sit on the couch and just talk. You can do that here. I'll simply select OK. We also have a couple new tools to look at over here on the left side of the screen. We've got the actual video tracking item here, and then we've got a crop tool if we want to crop into the movie, which I won't do right now. So since we're at time frame 0, and I have this idea I want to put a spaceship or something over here in the distance because I believe there's one in the library, I need to decide how I want to establish my tracking points. The tracking points, in a perfect world, follow the movie very carefully. Now, you have to look for good places to find a track, and by that I mean high contrast areas. Good areas of edge definition or light and black where we get junctions of those. The other thing is that the first point you click probably should be where you want your object, your character, or whatever it is to reside, because that will be the most critical type of point, like an anchor to the scene. So since I want this spaceship to be in the distance, what I'm going to do is look for a high contrast area, some good edge definition, and you can tell this movie is a little fuzzy. And it looks like this first one's over here. So I'm going to highlight my movie tracking tool. I'm going to click once right where this valley kind of comes down to the water. Got a nice dark area right here. I'll click once. And I'm going to create a second tracking point to give me some additional information that I can feed into the scene to make it behave a little bit better. This is another excellent point to follow, and a literal point. It's white coming down into a really dark area. The only issue I see is that right now in the video kind of matches up with this peak here. I'm going to go ahead and set one here. Now let's zoom into these points a little bit so you can see something else that's going on. There's an outer circle and an inner circle. The inner circle, if you will, is kind of a margin of error. Anything inside of this circle, it allows the program to kind of go, is that close enough? Is that right? And this is a pretty jerky type of video right now because it's in an airplane moving quickly. So what I'm going to do is now move this right down to the center here and make sure I have this exactly where I want it to end up, right here in the valley. I'm going to step forward one frame. Now you'll notice nothing happens. This is another little thing to get used to with motion tracking, and motion tracking requires constant finessing, whether it's Anime Studio Pro or some of the dedicated motion tracking programs out there. It's not a perfect science. So what I will do is simply click and move one of these areas. If I wanted a larger area of error, I could click on these dials right here in the center, or smaller, and move it down if it was super well defined. It's not, so I'm going to keep this rather large actually, and leave this here. Now we'll notice a keyframe just appeared, and I'm going to go ahead and step forward one frame, and we see this item is not tracking. That point stayed right where it was supposed to. I'm going to click and drag it right back up to this juncture, and that's fine. Now what I'll do is just slowly on the timeline here, click and drag through my movie. And the magic starts happening. It starts tracking the scene pretty closely. As we step through this, kind of want to see what's going on, because I'm sure these are going to drift. Right now, this one over here is starting to drift downwards into the water. So how do we fix that? Well, we get to a point where it's drifted a little bit. We simply click and bring it right back up to where it needs to be. And the program takes care of the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and continue dragging the timeline and slowly resetting these as I need to make sure they stay pretty faithful to where they're supposed to in the scene, and go all the way through the end of the movie, which is just a few seconds. I've got a drift going on here, come back out to this point. Let's reset this at the end of the valley and keep going. Kind of a tedious process. I won't have you watch me do this. I'll go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll get back together in the next movie.